Good morning, afternoon and evening all. This is Yorkie with episode 11 of my in-depth track guide series, and this week we are taking a look at Spa-Francorchamps from Spa in Belgium, and we are going to be following the usual video format, starting off with the breakdown of the track followed by the hot lap in both dry and wet conditions, and then finally the setups at the end of the video. So without further ado, let's get on with it. Okay, so starting off with the breakdown then, we gain control of the car just coming out of Blanchimont and running down towards the final chicane. Obviously try and get the car slowed down, ready for the first part, and you want to try and open up the second part, the left-hander. You want to try and get a good exit coming out of that, try and get the power down. Obviously start draining the curves as early as possible and get the DRS open at the activation point. We're going to let the car drift over to the left-hand side of the track, and we're looking for our braking point just past the 100-meter board and just after the white line that runs across the width of the track. This is approximately probably about 75 meters before the corner. We're going to be shifting down from 7th gear down into 1st, and you want to try and keep to the left-hand side. You then want to turn the car in later on and try and hook up a relatively late apex. So actually in the braking zone now, we're shifting down through the gears and we're turning the car in towards the apex point, which is, like I said, midway to relatively late in the corner. The apex point is on the curb on the inside here. You don't want to take too much curb on the inside, and your apex speed should be about 55 miles per hour, which equates to 90 kilometers per hour. You want to try and get a relatively late one, as it helps straighten up the car and get the power down relatively early, and try and use that mid-corner dip to try and keep that tighter line. So coming out through the exit now, we're trying to get the wheels straight as possible, as soon as possible. Once you get up into 3rd gear, you're going to drain about 25% of your curves as we come down the straight towards Eau Rouge. We're going to hang over to the right hand side of the track and then slowly bring it over to the left. Basically just clip the curves quite nicely through these complex of corners. The last part, you can take it a little bit off the inside, but of course try and keep 2 wheels within those white lines at all times. Open your DRS at the activation point and drain about 20% of your curves as you come down this straight and hanging to the left hand side of the track, ready for turn 5. So our braking point is roughly about 60 meters before the corner. We're going to be braking from 7th gear down into 2nd. You can keep it in 3rd, but I like to drop it into 2nd momentarily just to generate that extra little bit of turning and help get the car slowed down, ready for the left-hander that immediately follows. So hanging to the left-hand side of the track, we're going to turn in at the end of the rumble strips here, and we are looking for our apex point that is on the inside curb. Your apex speed should be about 100 miles per hour, which equates to 160 kilometers per hour, and as you probably saw, I dropped momentarily down into 2nd, then brought it pretty much straight back up into 3rd as soon as I started to balance the throttle. You want to keep a relatively tight line to the exit of this corner as the left-hander follows, so you want to try and open that up a little bit. You want to be careful of the transition as it's quite easy to lose grip midway through, and we're looking for our 2nd apex point on this left-hander here, again on that inside curb. Your apex speed should be about 110 miles per hour, which equates to 175 kilometers per hour. At this point you should probably be about 40, maybe 50% throttle. You want to try and keep a tight line as a right-hander then follows, and you want to try and open that up as much as possible. So bringing the car back over to the left, we're going to transition over into this right-hander now. This is completely flat out, and your apex point should be on the inside curb here with an apex speed of 125 miles per hour, which equates to 201 kilometers per hour. Like I said, completely flat out, try and keep your foot in it throughout the duration of this corner, and as we come out wide, you want to run the curb ever so slightly on the exit and basically just try and keep a nice smooth flowing line. So doing that, exactly that. Tap the grass ever so slightly on the exit, but that's not too much of a problem, and we're keeping to the left hand side of the track, ready for turn 8. Our braking point starts at the red and yellow curbing on the left hand side of the track there, and we're going to be shifting from 5th gear down into 2nd. I do momentarily drop into 1st just to help generate that little bit of turning, but 2nd gear is the gear that we're mainly going to be using. So shifting down through the gears now, we're in 2nd, momentarily drop it into 1st, then bring it straight back up into 2nd again as I start to bring in and balance the throttle. We're looking for our apex point on the inside curb here, which with an apex speed of 80 miles per hour, which equates to 130 kilometers per hour. You basically want to continue balancing the throttle throughout the duration of this bend, and as we come out the exit, you want to let the car drift out wide, bring that throttle back in, run the curb ever so slightly, and then transition over to the right hand side of the track. So this is exactly what we're going to do now. Kiss that curb on the outside, get over to the right hand side of the track to open up this turn 9 left-hander, and we're going to throw the car in. We're probably balancing about 50-60% throttle at this point. You want to run the curb on the inside here, clipping an apex point with 120 miles per hour, which equates to 195 kilometers per hour. Don't get too hard on the accelerator coming out the exit, as you don't want to run wide onto the curb on the outside, as you want to try and keep two wheels within those white lines at all times. So instead, just brushing the curb on the outside, full throttle coming down towards P1. As the curb on the outside ends, we're going to lift off and balance it about 50% throttle, throwing the car in towards the apex point on the grass verge on the inside here. Your apex speed should be about 170 miles per hour, which equates to 275 kilometers per hour. You want to try and maintain 6th gear, although under racing conditions you could probably want to drop it into 5th to help gain that little bit of extra acceleration coming out of the corner. But we're going to bring the throttle back in, run the curb ever so slightly on the exit, and basically just try and keep a nice smooth flowing line throughout the entire duration of this corner. So bringing the car back over to the left hand side, ready for this right and then left. We're looking for our braking point, which is at the 50-meter board. We're going to be shifting from 7th gear down into 3rd. If you get this first corner right, you can set yourself up rather nicely for a good exit coming out the left-hander, the second part. And we're going to keep to the left-hand side of the track as we come through this braking zone. Just going to drop down a couple of gears just as the curb on the outside there starts. I'm going to throw the car in, and as you've seen, I've already shifted up into 4th gear, bringing the throttle back in. Our apex point is on the inside curb here, about 120 miles per hour, which equates to 195 kilometers per hour. Try not to take too much curb on the inside, try and keep those two wheels within those white lines at all times. But at this point, I should be balancing the throttle, bringing it back in slightly. We're going to transition over to the left-hand side of the track into this long left-hander. At this point, you should probably be about 50, maybe 60% throttle. Again, running the curb on the inside with an apex speed of 125 miles per hour, which equates to 200 kilometers per hour. Keep running this curb, and as you come out wide, unwind that wheel. Try and get as much acceleration coming out of this corner as possible, and obviously run the curb on the outside. Use that full width of the track. Should be full throttle from this point. Run that curb, put up into 5th, bring the car over to the left hand side of the track, and at the start of the red and yellow curbing on the outside there is our braking point for this next double right hander. So in the braking zone, we're going to be dropping from 5th gear down into 2nd, again only using 2nd momentarily to help generate that extra little bit of turning. We'll be popping it back up into 3rd relatively quickly, shifting down through those gears, turning the car in. Up it goes up into 3rd as we bring the throttle back in, balancing it as we run in the inside curb here. Your apex point should be at this point here with an apex speed of 105 miles per hour, which equates to 170 kilometers per hour. At this point, you're probably about 20-30% of throttle, bringing it back in as you come out through the exit of this corner. Run the curb on the exit, and we're going to stick to the left hand side of the track as a shallow right hander follows. This one is completely flat out, basically just kiss the curb on the inside there and kiss the curb on the exit as well. And we're going to continue down along this back straight now. As you get up into 6th gear, drain your curves down to about 10% remaining. You're now coming into Blanchimont. It's completely flat out, just try and keep a nice smooth shallow flowing line, try not to scrub off too much speed. Now coming into this final chicane, we're going to hang from the middle to the left hand side of the track as the track actually does curve in ever so slightly. We're going to be shifting from 7th gear down into 1st. Braking point is at the 100-meter board here, and basically we're just going to brake hard, bang down through the gears. We're then going to throw the car into this final chicane. So doing exactly that, you see the track come over towards and meet you as you keep a nice straight line, throwing the car in, and we're looking for our apex point on this inside curb here with an apex speed of about 60 miles per hour, which equates to 95 kilometers per hour. You want to avoid the large red curbing on the inside, as this is actually a very high curb and will bounce the car quite heavily. And at this point here, you basically just want to brush the curb, balance the throttle. You want to give a short spurt of the accelerator as you come out and transition over to this left-hander. It's only a very small spurt. And we're now going to transition into this left, and we want to clip again this relatively flat curbing on the inside, avoiding the large red curbing on the inner part there. Your apex speed should be about 50 miles per hour, which equates to 80 kilometers per hour. And at this point, you should be starting to balance the throttle. You want to watch the bump on the exit of this corner here, as it's quite easy to spin that rear end. Once you've got the car straight, bring it back into full throttle, drain the rest of your curves, and open up the DRS at the activation point to complete your lap of Spa. So we're now going to move on to the hot lap, which is exactly the same lap that I just showed you there, but without me talking over the top, so you can hear the engine sound and hopefully my throttle inputs. So now that you've seen the dry lap, we're now going to move on to a wet lap of Spa, and gaining control of the car in the same place. We basically want to take the same approach as we did to the final 2 corners, try and get the first part slowed down, try and open up the second, and try and get a good exit. So doing exactly that, we're balancing the throttle, keep the curve quite nicely on the outside. Once we got up into second, third gear, that's when we're full throttle, drain as much of the cars as we can before the start finish line, bring the car over to the left hand side of the track for turn 1, and our braking point is at the 100-metre board. Clip the apex point quite nicely. Once we get the car straight, that's when we get on the throttle. We're actually going to drain about 10-15% of the curves this time, not 20-25. And as we come down to a rouge, basically completely flat out, same approach as we did in the dry. So clipping those curves quite nicely. Then as we come out the top of a rouge, underneath this Rolex bridge, we're going to start draining the curves down to about 50% remaining, try and get us up to our top speed. Our braking point for this right-hander is exactly the same place as it was in the dry, hooking up those apexes quite nicely on the inside curbs there. This corner isn't quite flat out, it's probably about 80-90% throttle. Then this long right-hander here, same braking point as it was before, however I didn't quite get it slowed down to maybe brake 5 meters before that. Missed the apex and I didn't use the full width of the track. Hooking up this corner quite nicely though, although I was just shy of the apex, which did force me to run out wide ever so slightly. P1 now, exactly the same approach as it was before. Try and keep it in 6th, obviously drop it down into 5th under racing conditions, carry the speed throughout the duration of the corner. Bring it to the left hand side of the track, again braking point at the 50-metre board, same approach as it was in the dry, try and get the good run coming out this left hander, which is exactly what we do, and again same braking point for this fast double right hander here. The second part is completely flat out again like it was in the dry. As we get up into 6th gear, we're going to drain about 20-30% of our cars, leave about 15% remaining. Keep it completely flat out throughout the duration of this back straight. Coming into Blanchimont, again completely flat out, just try and keep a nice smooth flowing line, try not to scrub off any speed. Coming into the final chicane now, braking about 5 meters before the 100-meter board. Try and get the car slowed down for the first part, which will help open up the second part a little bit better than I did there. Obviously get on the power once you get the car straight and drain the rest of the curves towards the start finish line. So that completes the hot lap section of this video then, and we're now going to move on to the setups. Firstly, with the dry, we were using a 2-1 aero on front and rear wings. Our braking was a 48-52 with a high and standard pressure and size. Our balance was an 8 on the front, 2 on the rear. Our suspension, ride heights 1-1, and then front spring stiffness of a 7 and rear spring stiffness of 1. Our gear ratios for the dry were there in miles per hour, and again the gear ratios in kilometers per hour as well. And then finally the tow and camber settings, tow completely default, camber as you can see there changed ever so slightly. So now onto the wet setup. I was using 2-2 on the wings, one up from the rear. We are using a 47-53 and then a high and standard in pressure and size, an 8 and a 1 for the balance. And then for our suspension ride heights, a 1-1 and then a 7 and a 1. And our gear ratios were as follows in miles per hour. And then of course again the gear ratios in kilometers per hour. And then finally the tow and camber settings were left exactly the same as they were in the dry. So that's going to conclude episode 11 of my in-depth track guide series. Hopefully you guys found it useful for helping you out in Spa. Please leave a rating for the video. Also, any comments and questions, feel free to leave them below. And of course, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more track guides and content in the future. I shall hopefully see you soon, guys. Take care.